They said my patriotism was a violation. They called my pride an eyesore. The letter from the HOA gave me 24 hours to take it down, the single American flag flying proudly by my front door. But I didn't take it down. Instead, I made a call, and then another, and another. 48 hours later, a truck pulled up to my house, and the real violation began. Because if they wanted a war over one symbol of freedom, I was ready to give them a battle they would never forget. What would you do when petty rules threaten the very principles you believe in? For my entire life, the 4th of July wasn't just a holiday. It was a feeling. It was the smell of charcoal grills and the sound of laughter echoing down our quiet tree-lined street. It was the memory of my father, a veteran, carefully raising the flag every morning with a quiet sense of duty. So, when my wife and I finally saved enough to buy our first house, a modest but perfect ranch-style home in the peaceful Willow Creek community, flying that flag was non-negotiable. It wasn't political. It was personal. It was home. The first few months were a dream. We painted the shutters a cheerful blue, planted a garden, and waved to neighbors who seemed friendly if a bit reserved. The house felt like ours, a tiny piece of the American dream we'd worked so hard for. And right there, standing tall and proud in a simple flagpole holder by the front steps, was our flag. It was the final, perfect touch. I'd seen the HOA paperwork at closing, a thick binder of rules about fence heights and mailbox styles. I'd skimmed it, assuming it was all just standard stuff to keep the neighborhood looking nice. Nothing in my quick glance suggested that a simple, respectfully displayed American flag could be a problem. How could it be? But then, the first envelope arrived. It wasn't in our mailbox. It was taped to our front door, stark white against the redwood. It bore the official seal of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. My stomach dropped with a quiet dread I didn't yet understand. This wasn't a welcome letter. It was a citation, a violation notice, and the reason listed? Unauthorized exterior modification. Article 4, Section 7. My eyes scanned the perfectly manicured lawns of my neighbors, wondering which one of them had looked at my flag, that symbol of everything I believed in, and saw nothing but an infraction. The dream, it seemed, had rules I had never agreed to, and the battle for my own front yard was about to begin. Unauthorized exterior modification. I read the words again, a cold knot of disbelief tightening in my chest. My flag. They were calling my American flag an unauthorized modification? My first move was reasonable. I assumed it was a misunderstanding. I called the HOA management company, my voice friendly and patient. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. Article 4, Section 7, she recited, as if reading from a script. All exterior decorations, fixtures, or installations not expressly permitted in the community guidelines require pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It's not a decoration, I argued, my patience thinning. It's the flag of the United States. There's a federal law, the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. She cut me off, her tone becoming icy. The act prohibits unreasonable restrictions, sir. Our bylaws, which you agreed to upon purchase, require approval for any permanent exterior fixture. Your flagpole holder is drilled. The violation notice was a polite piece of paper that hid a deeply impolite demand. Into the brick. That makes it permanent. You failed to seek approval. Therefore, it is unauthorized. You have 48 hours to remove it or a fine of $50 will be levied, accruing daily until compliance is met. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling not with fear, but with a raw, simmering anger. This wasn't about bricks or bylaws. This was a power play. Someone, likely my perfectly manicured neighbor, Mr. Henderson, from across the street who served on the HOA board, had decided my expression of patriotism didn't fit his aesthetic. I refused to be bullied. I left the flag up. 2 days later, the first fine arrived. Then another. The envelopes, once taped to my door, now came certified mail. The daily $50 fines began to stack up. A financial death by 1,000 paper cuts. $350, $500, $750. My wife started watching the mailbox with a nervous eye. "This is our savings," she'd say, her voice tight with stress. "This is our vacation. This is insane." She was right. It was insane. But backing down felt like surrendering a piece of my very identity. I decided to fight fire with paperwork. I requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. The meeting was held in a sterile community room that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet hostility. 5 board members, led by a smug Mr. Henderson, sat behind a long table like a tribunal. I stood before them, a lone homeowner, and made my case. I cited federal law. I spoke about my father's service. I pleaded for common sense. They listened with blank, impassive faces. When I finished, Henderson cleared his throat. "Your emotional appeal is noted," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "However, rules are rules. We cannot make exceptions for one homeowner without setting a precedent. The fines will stand. The flag must come down." The injustice of it was breathtaking. They weren't listening. They didn't care. This was about control, pure and simple. I walked out of that room that night feeling a profound sense of helplessness. They had the bylaws, they had the system, and they had my money. The next morning, a new notice arrived. It wasn't just a fine, it was a lien warning. They were threatening to put a claim on my house itself for the unpaid fines. The pressure was no longer just financial, it was an existential threat to our home. My wife looked at me, her eyes filled with tears of fear and frustration. "We have to take it down," she whispered. "We can't lose our home over this." My heart broke. She was right. We couldn't. I felt a crushing defeat as I walked outside that evening, my steps heavy. I reached for the flag, my fingers brushing against the coarse fabric. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. I went back inside, defeated but not yet broken. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rage and helplessness warred inside me. I ended up at my kitchen table, the massive HOA binder looming in front of me. The plan required precision and secrecy. I couldn't tip them off. I found a supplier online and placed the order, 500 small handheld American flags on 10-inch wooden poles. The confirmation email felt like receiving battle plans. They arrived in 2 large unmarked boxes. I stored them in my garage, hidden behind Christmas decorations, my secret arsenal. I marked the day on my calendar, the 4th of July. There was a beautiful, defiant poetry in that timing. The morning of the 4th dawned bright and clear. But on my street, a different kind of spectacle was unfolding. News vans, alerted by a few well-placed calls from supportive neighbors, were parked along the curb. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, a mix of curious onlookers, supportive residents, and a few visibly angry HOA board members, with Mr. Henderson at the center, arms crossed, face like stone. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked out my front door. I ignored the stairs and the cameras. I carried a single box. I opened it, pulled out a tiny flag on its tiny pole, and walked to the edge of my lawn. I knelt down and pushed the pointed end into the soft earth. Then I went back to the box and got another, and another. For the next 2 hours, in a meditative, deliberate silence, I planted. Row after row, column after column, transforming my entire front lawn into a grid-pointed sea of potential. It was a bizarre, captivating sight. My wife joined me, then a neighbor from down the street who'd always hated the HOA's nitpicking, then another. It became a quiet, powerful community action. By 11 a.m., it was done. 500 bare poles stood in silent, perfect formation across every inch of grass. The crowd watched in bewildered silence. Henderson looked confused, then smug, thinking I'd surrendered and planted some kind of pathetic straw garden. Then, at the stroke of noon, I walked back out. I held a single folded flag. I unfolded it, attached it to the first pole, and watched it snap open in the breeze. A ripple went through the crowd. I moved to the second pole, then the third. With each flag I raised, the visual impact grew more staggering. The sea of red, white, and blue wasn't just a protest. It was a breathtaking display of pure, undiluted patriotism. By the time I planted the final flag, the effect was overwhelming. My property was no longer a lawn. It was a monument, a living, breathing testament to malicious compliance. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. A local news reporter began doing a live stand-up in front of the display. Henderson finally broke. He stormed across the street, his face purple with rage, stopping at the very edge of my property line, as if held back by an invisible force field. "This is an outrage," he sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the flags. "This is a blatant violation. This eyesore will be fined. Every single one of them." I stopped what I was doing and turned to face him, my voice calm but carrying over the crowd. "Which bylaw exactly, Mr. Henderson?" Please point it out to me and the news cameras. These are temporary, non-permanent decorative items. Each one is under 12 inches in height. They are explicitly exempt from approval under Article 6, Section 2B of the bylaws you enforce. I'm simply decorating for the holiday. Isn't this what you wanted? No permanent modifications. The camera light swung to his face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked from the flags to me, to the cameras, to the cheering neighbors. The rulebook he had wielded like a weapon had just been turned against him, live on television. He was utterly, completely defeated. Without another word, he turned on his heel and retreated into his house, the door slamming shut behind him. The crowd's cheers grew even louder. The victory in that moment was so sweet, so visually satisfying, it was almost overwhelming. The HOA's official response was swift and pathetic. A certified letter was delivered by a flustered-looking courier who had to navigate the forest of flags to reach my door. It was a cease-and-desist order, citing every vague bylaw they could think of. Unsightly display, creating a nuisance, violating community aesthetic standards. I was ready. My response, also sent certified mail, was a single page. I highlighted their own bylaw. Temporary, non-permanent decorative items under 12 inches in height are exempt from architectural review approval. I included printed, time-stamped photos proving each flag and pole was under 12 inches and could be removed in seconds. I concluded with a simple sentence. The board's arbitrary enforcement of its own rules is not only selective and unreasonable, but is now a matter of public record and public ridicule. The silence from the HOA board was deafening. They were trapped. To fine me, they would have to argue in a court of law that 500 small American flags were a greater violation than one large one. They would have to explain to a judge, and the court of public opinion now firmly on my side, why they were so desperate to stifle this specific expression of patriotism on the 4th of July. The legal fees alone would dwarf my fines, and the PR disaster would be immeasurable. The fines were quietly dropped. The lien threat vanished. A week later, a new letter arrived, not a violation, but an amendment to the community bylaws. The Architectural Review Committee had clarified its rules to explicitly permit the respectful display of the American flag on a single freestanding pole of a reasonable height. I had won, but the impact went far beyond my property line. The story didn't end with that summer. The local news segment was picked up by national outlets, becoming a viral sensation about HOA overreach and one man's clever defiance. For months, I received letters and emails from people all over the country, sharing their own stories of petty HOA tyranny. My fight had become a symbol for countless others. The long-term consequences were deeply satisfying. At the next annual HOA meeting, there was a record turnout. Mr. Henderson and his entire slate of board members were voted out in a landslide, replaced by a new group of homeowners who ran on a platform of common sense and common decency. The first order of business for the new board was to form a committee to review and simplify the oppressive bylaws. I still fly my flag, the original one, on a sturdy pole by my front door. No one ever said another word about it. But every 4th of July, I recreate the display. It's become a neighborhood tradition. People bring their kids over to help plant the tiny flags. It's a celebration, but it's also a reminder that bullies, whether on a playground or behind a boardroom table, rely on your compliance. They bank on you believing the system is too big to fight. But sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't a sledgehammer, it's a scalpel. It's finding the one tiny crack in their armor of rules and shining such a bright, relentless light through it that the entire structure is exposed for what it really is, fragile. So the next time you receive a letter that feels unjust, a rule that feels petty, or a demand that feels designed to break your spirit, remember this. Remember the sea of 500 flags. Read the fine print, find your leverage, because you never know. Your moment of defiance might not just win your own battle. It might just change the entire neighborhood.